Story 1. In 1888, Almond Brown Stroger, an undertaker, noticed he was losing a lot of business to the other undertaker in town. He found out that the other undertaker's wife was a telephone operator, and when she intercepted people asking to be connected to Stroger's funeral home, the operator would route the call to her husband's funeral home instead. 3 years later, Stroger patented the automatic telephone exchange, a system that allowed telephone users to make calls without the need for human operators, single-handedly destroying an entire workforce. Story 2. Tony Iommi lost the tips of his ring and middle fingers on his right hand in a sheet metal accident at age 17. He was told he would likely never play guitar again, as he was left-handed and injured his fretboard hand. Tony fashioned his own homemade thimbles and learned to play again. Not having full sensation in his fingers, he found it difficult to play, so he tuned his guitar down to loosen the strings, effectively creating the heavy metal sound Black Sabbath would eventually become famous for. Story 3. Barry Marshall thought the ulcers were caused by bacteria but couldn't get ethics approval for human testing. So he drank Helicobacter pylori bacteria himself and developed ulcers 3 days later, which confirmed his theory. Story 4. This is very personal for me, but my grandpa, who raised me with my grandma, retired as an engineer. He was bored and saw a need for what was then called mobility equipment. He invented the standing frame in the 1980s. It allowed people with spinal issues, such as quadriplegia, to be transitioned from lying down to vertically standing up, fully supported and safe without leaving their bed. He made quite a few variations for different sizes and ages, and they sold all over the world. He simply said, "No one else was helping, so I did." All from our suburban garage in Sydney, Australia. He was awarded an Order of Australia, one of our country's highest honors. He was my hero. Story 5. In the early 1960s, Ford was interested in purchasing Ferrari and invested a lot of money in investigating their finances, facilities, and more. Enzo Ferrari played along but ultimately didn't really plan on actually selling to Ford. Instead, he used the fact that Ford was interested to negotiate a favorable deal when he eventually sold to Fiat, a deal which allowed him to maintain control over the racing division of Ferrari. To say that Ford was upset about having the rug pulled out from under them would be an understatement. They figured out that the only thing they could do that was guaranteed to upset Enzo would be to go after his pride and joy, Ferrari's winning streak at Le Mans. So they set out to do exactly that. They poured tons of money and resources into making a car that would achieve this, which ended up being the Ford GT40. Another major Enzo Ferrari blunder was Lamborghini's sports car division. Lamborghini was making tractors and was pretty successful at that. Ferruccio Lamborghini owned a Ferrari sports car and had issues with the clutch. As he had some mechanical experience, he figured out the issue and reached out to Enzo with some suggestions on how it could be fixed, only to be met with contempt. Ferruccio was upset and promptly decided he'd build a better sports car than Ferrari ever could, resulting in the Miura, which laid the foundations for Lamborghini to continue making sports cars. Story 6. Girolamo Cardano was a mathematician in the Renaissance who was trying to find a generalized solution for the roots of cubic functions. One of the problems that kept appearing was he needed to take the square root of negative numbers, something traditional real number algebra would not allow. Cardano, instead of dismissing it as impossible, decided that these imaginary numbers, as they were called later, must exist, an astoundingly controversial opinion at the time. Now we use them every day. Story 7. Maybe not the greatest, but George Lucas wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie. They wouldn't give him the rights, so he wrote his own space opera, created his own special effects company, and basically became a multi-billionaire by making the biggest money-making movie franchise there ever was, at least for a while. Story 8. It's not exactly a forget it, I'll do it myself, but a professor named Richard Scaliver, along with his research partner Georgina Long, has developed breakthrough melanoma research and treatments. Last year, Scaliver was diagnosed with a type of grade 4 brain cancer that was incurable. So he and his partner developed a new experimental treatment, with Scaliver being the first patient to receive it. A year later, Scaliver appears completely cured with no sign of recurrence of the brain tumor. Story 9. After the death of her husband, Pharaoh Thutmose II, Egypt was supposed to be ruled by her stepson, Thutmose III. However, he was still a child, and Hatshepsut was meant to act as regent until he came of age. Instead of merely serving as regent, Hatshepsut declared herself pharaoh, one of the very few women to do so in ancient Egypt. She ruled for over 20 years, expanded Egypt's trade networks, commissioned grand architectural projects like her famous temple at Deir el-Bahri, and established a period of peace and prosperity. Story 10. Linus Torvalds is really an interesting person. After creating Linux, the system running on most servers today, he also made Git purely motivated by dissatisfaction with the then available versioning programs. It became not only the versioning tool for Linux developers, his goal, but also the most popular versioning tool being used by software companies and developers today. Story 11. My vote goes to Dashrath Manji. When his wife died in 1959 after being injured from falling from a mountain, and because the same mountain blocked easy access to a nearby hospital in time, he decided to carve a 110-meter long, 9.1-meter wide, and 7.7-meter deep path through a ridge of hills using only a hammer and a chisel. Story 12. Sony entered the gaming industry after a failed partnership with Nintendo on a CD add-on. The rest is the history of one of the best-selling home video game consoles, the PlayStation. Story 13. You know that old wives' tale about how cracking your knuckles will cause arthritis? Well, Dr. Donald Unger decided to test that theory in the most extreme way he could. Once a day for 50 years, he cracked the knuckles in his left hand but not in his right hand. Neither hand developed arthritis, thus disproving the old wives' tale. 50 years, people. The dedication is just perfect. Story 14. After the mutiny on the Bounty, Captain Bligh was set in a rowboat at sea off Madagascar, with a jug of water and some hardtack biscuits. The captain rowed himself back to England to bring the mutineers up on charges. Estimated time of arrival. Read down for correct details. Story 15. I can only remember a moment in personal history. I was the last generation in my country to do mandatory military service, and apparently my generation is particularly lazy. We were supposed to pass some sort of exercise course and had a time that we were supposed to do it in. Almost nobody could do it, and everyone complained that it was some sort of elite target that obviously couldn't be reached. We were stunned when the officer, a chubby guy in his 50s, flew through that entire thing with a mixture of rage and disappointment in our performance, easily a minute faster than any of us did. He didn't say a word after that, neither did we. Nobody ever questioned the guy again. If he said it was possible after that demonstration. Story 16. Leo Major liberates Zwolle by himself out of sheer rage and spite. He went to scout out German numbers and decided to do it solo, one man versus about 200 to 300 Germans. Story 17. The group of elderly people who tunneled under the Berlin Wall because they were told to leave. I recall this exhibit from the Checkpoint Charlie Museum about 20 years ago. There was a group of elderly Germans who lived on the east side of the wall, and quite near it. They sought help from someone who ran escape routes to the west and did a lot of tunneling. He basically told them they were too old and useless to help. They were not having it. They set out to make their own tunnel. They devised their own system of signals and codes with the planting of flowers. Each person had a role, from digging to dirt dispersal to manning the planting signals. The best part is that they made their tunnel tall enough so they could all walk through instead of having to crawl, as would have been the case with the other tunnel. Story 18. I have bought some of the most famous Grand Touring cars, he would later say, and in each of these magnificent machines I have found some faults. Too hot, or uncomfortable, or not sufficiently fast, or not perfectly finished. Now I want to make a Grand Touring car without faults. A perfect car. In 1963, Ferruccio founded Automobili Lamborghini, employing a talented team that included Giampaolo Dallara, Paolo Stanzani, and New Zealander Bob Wallace, with Giotto Bizzarini as a consultant. Lamborghini built his factory on farmland in Sant'Agata Bolognese, an easy commute for the skilled workers employed by Ferrari and Maserati in nearby Medina. Story 19. Maria Oktyabrskaya. After her husband was killed fighting Nazis in 1941, Oktyabrskaya sold her possessions to donate a tank for the war effort and requested that she be allowed to drive it. She received training to drive and fix a T-34 medium tank, which she named Fighting Girlfriend. Oktyabrskaya proved her ability and bravery in battle and was promoted to the rank of sergeant. After she died of wounds from battle in 1944, she was posthumously made a hero of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union's highest honor for bravery during combat. She was the first female tank driver to be awarded the title. Story 20. Lamborghini. The company originally made tractors. The owner bought a Ferrari and was unhappy with it. He went to Ferrari with his concerns and was dismissed, so he made his own. Story 21. My vote is Alex Zanardi. The former Formula One and Championship Auto Racing Teams racer, back in 2001, returned to Championship Auto Racing Teams and got into an accident that caused another car to shear the nose of his car off. If you're unfamiliar with the body plan of this kind of car, that doesn't sound like much, but these are low, open-wheel vehicles, and the nose has the driver's legs in it. So he suffered a traumatic amputation of both legs, one at and one above his knee, and they had to remove more to clean up and close the wounds, losing 3/4 of his blood volume and waking up after the crash as a double amputee. Now, most people would think, wow, I am lucky to be alive after such a crash. I should probably take it easy and make the most of the rest of my life and stay away from cars after one tore my legs off. But Alex Zanardi is not most people. As soon as he was healed and fitted with prosthetics, he started trying to drive again and found all the prosthetics to be insufficient for driving. He ended up learning about and designing his own prosthetics to his own standards to facilitate getting himself back behind the wheel of a car and on a track again. He was able to get back into a championship auto racing car to ceremonially finish the race he was nearly killed in 2003, and moved on to racing again in the Touring Series later in 2003. He has been racing in various ways up until recently. This includes continuing with hand cycling, which he picked up in 2001 while recovering from the amputations, and even competing in the Paralympics, winning multiple gold and silver medals, marathons, and setting records in the process. Unfortunately, in 2020 he suffered a second serious racing accident while hand cycling during a road race, where he lost control and went face first into an oncoming truck. And lived. Again. As of 2022, he's back home and continuing to recover, with no word on if he'll take his third lease on life to continue racing once recovered. Incredible man. On a non-racing note, the man has the strangest luck because, in the middle of 2022, he got hospitalized again from a house fire and lived again. I can't easily find if he was actually injured in the fire. The hospitalization is listed as being because the fire damaged equipment he needs to live, so it may just have been the only place that had the stuff he needed, and he wasn't any further hurt. Something really has it out for him, and something else will not let him die. Story 22. Old mate who removed his own appendix in Antarctica, or the Australian nurse who was working in the outback and treated his own heart attack. Story 23. The Wright brothers actually set out to build a working heavier-than-air flying machine themselves and never expected anyone else to do it for them. They originally believed they could rely on other people's knowledge and research for multiple things, such as airfoils, propellers, and engines. They soon found out they couldn't. So they built their own wind tunnel to research airfoils and later propellers so they could build wings that could generate lift and propellers that would effectively propel the aircraft forward. After finding out nobody had ever considered building a lightweight engine, they figured out how to build one themselves. They even developed a warping trailing edge for their wings to control the roll movement of the aircraft, though similar functionality, now universally known as aileron, had been invented by others before them. Still, they appear to be the first to seriously consider the need for three-axis control for aircraft. Then they flew their own contraption, which may have been necessary because it was so complicated to keep in the air one had to know it pretty intimately to have any kind of hope to keep it flying even for 12 seconds. Nobody had considered organized training of pilots yet, so shortly after, the Wright brothers established a flight school also. Story 24. I don't know if this fits, but I feel like it deserves an honorable mention. Teresa Kachindamoto, the paramount chief of the Dedza district in Malawi, is renowned for her courageous efforts to eradicate child marriage in her community. Since taking office, she has dissolved over 3,500 child marriages, sending each of those children back to school. Kachindamoto's forceful action in dissolving child marriages and insisting on education for both girls and boys has been met with both praise and criticism. Despite receiving death threats and backlash from some community members, she has remained committed to her cause. She is now lobbying the government to increase the marriageable age to 21. In a country with one of the highest rates of child marriage in the world, Kachinamoto's efforts have made a significant difference. According to reports, she has stopped around 850 child marriages in just 3 years and over 300 in a single month. Her work has inspired a community-wide shift towards prioritizing education and protecting children's rights,